Attrition warfare. The idea behind this strategy is simple. Wear the enemy down until they have nothing left to fight with. Instead of trying to win in one decisive move, a force using attrition focuses on draining the opponent's soldiers, supplies, and willpower over time. World War I became one of history's most brutal examples of this, with both sides losing millions of men in a slow, grinding conflict that lasted years. It is not a glamorous strategy, but historically it has worked, especially when one side has significantly more resources than the other.
Blitzkrieg. Germany introduced this approach to the world during World War II, and it changed how modern warfare was understood. The strategy combined fast-moving armored tanks, motorized infantry, and close air support to punch through enemy lines quickly and deeply before defenders could regroup. The goal was to create chaos behind enemy lines rather than simply pushing forward in a straight line. Poland fell in weeks. France fell in about 6. Speed and psychological shock were just as much a weapon as firepower.
Guerrilla Warfare. This strategy is built around speed, surprise, and disappearing before the enemy can respond. Small mobile groups attack supply lines, ambush patrols, and retreat into terrain they know well. It has been used for centuries, from the Spanish resistance against Napoleon to the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. The core advantage is that a smaller or weaker force can tie down a much larger army indefinitely, making the cost of continuing the war too high to bear. Conventional armies often struggle against it because there is no clear front line and no obvious enemy to defeat head-on.
Siege warfare. This strategy removes the need to fight an enemy directly by simply surrounding them and waiting. A besieging force cuts off food, water, and reinforcements until the people inside a fortified position surrender or starve. Ancient cities were designed entirely around surviving sieges, with thick walls, deep wells, and large grain stores. The Siege of Jerusalem, the Siege of Constantinople, and the Siege of Leningrad during World War II all showed how devastating this strategy could be, sometimes lasting months or even years before the outcome was decided.
Scorched Earth. When an army cannot hold territory, it sometimes destroys everything of value before retreating. Crops, roads, bridges, supplies. Anything the advancing enemy could use gets burned or demolished. Russia applied this during Napoleon's invasion in 1812, leaving the French army to march deeper into a land that could not feed or shelter them. It is a strategy that carries enormous human costs for the defending side as well, but throughout history it has proved effective at stopping invasions that seemed unstoppable.
Encirclement. The goal here is to completely surround the enemy force, cutting off their escape routes and supply lines until they surrender or are destroyed. The Carthaginian general Hannibal executed one of history's most famous examples at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, encircling a Roman army far larger than his own. Germany used the same concept on an enormous scale at Stalingrad, though there the strategy turned against them when Soviet forces reversed the encirclement. When it works, encirclement can end entire campaigns in a single engagement.
Total war.
Most strategies aim to defeat an enemy's military. Total war aims to defeat an entire nation. Every resource a country has, its factories, its infrastructure, its civilian population's willingness to continue, becomes a legitimate target. World War II was the clearest modern example, with strategic bombing campaigns deliberately targeting cities and industrial centers on both sides. The logic is brutal but direct. If a population can no longer produce weapons, fuel armies, or maintain morale, the war ends faster. Total war erases the traditional boundary between soldier and civilian. Naval Blockade. Rather than fighting on land, this strategy targets an enemy's ability to receive goods by sea. By surrounding coastlines and cutting off imports of food, fuel, and weapons, a naval power can slowly strangle an opponent's economy and military. Britain used blockades extensively during the Napoleonic Wars, and again in both world wars. The damage is not always immediate, but over months and years, a successful blockade can bring even a powerful nation to the edge of collapse without a single major land battle being fought.
Psychological warfare. This strategy treats the enemy's mind as a battlefield. Leaflet drops, radio broadcasts, planted rumors, and deliberate displays of overwhelming force are all tools used to break morale before or during physical fighting. During the Vietnam War, the United States scattered millions of leaflets over enemy territory. In the Gulf War, similar campaigns encouraged Iraqi soldiers to surrender before ground forces even arrived. The goal is always the same: make the enemy believe that resistance is pointless, so that the physical cost of the war never has to be paid in full.
Proxy War. Rather than fighting an enemy directly, a powerful nation arms, funds, and supports a smaller force to fight on its behalf. The Cold War turned much of the world into a theater for this strategy, with the United States and Soviet Union backing opposing sides in conflicts across Korea, Vietnam, Angola, and Afghanistan. Neither superpower wanted direct military confrontation, but both wanted influence. Proxy wars allowed them to compete without triggering the kind of open conflict that could escalate into nuclear exchange. The countries caught in the middle often paid the heaviest price.
Defensive warfare. Not every strategy is about taking ground. Defensive warfare focuses entirely on holding position, absorbing attacks, and making an offensive too costly to sustain. Well-prepared defensive lines, fortified positions, and strategic use of terrain can neutralize armies far larger than the defending force. Finland's resistance against the Soviet Union during the Winter War of 1939 demonstrated this clearly, with a much smaller nation inflicting enormous casualties on a superior force through disciplined, terrain-aware defense. The goal is not to win by advancing, but to win by making the enemy stop. Asymmetric warfare. This strategy describes any conflict where two sides fight with dramatically different levels of power, technology, or resources, and the weaker side adapts its methods to avoid fighting on the stronger side's terms. Rather than conventional battles, asymmetric warfare involves roadside bombs, cyber attacks, targeted assassinations, and blending into civilian populations. The conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan after 2001 became defining modern examples, where technologically advanced militaries struggled for years against opponents who refused to fight in ways that their advantages were designed to counter. It is perhaps the most common form of warfare in the modern world.